I finally understand metaethics. It may have taken a few days, but it all makes sense now. It's kind of ironic because earlier I sort of regretted learning about epistemology, but now I'm glad I did. Because with all the stuff I read, there was actually a lot of callbacks to epistemology and it helped me understand some of the broader concepts that I definitely would not have understood unless I read up on them beforehand. So, what did I learn from all of this? Well, most people are going to hate me for this, but here's my conclusion. Moral realism is not real. To be more specific, I don't think it has sufficient evidence. Now hold on just a sec. Don't get pissed at me. These are just the things I found. And being the fallibilist that I am, I'm always open to the possibility that I made an error, and I will give a fair hearing to any other argument. I just want to know what's true. Unfortunately, realism failed to prove this to me. So, why don't we go through what I learned? Metaethics is the branch of philosophy that examines the nature, scope, and meaning of ethical concepts. Where normative ethics inquires what we should do, and applied ethics investigates how to apply what we should do, metaethics asks something much more difficult. What does good really mean? This is a reoccurring question that I don't think many people understand when they're talking about metaethics. There's a word that stood out most to me during researching this subject, and I think that word is taken for granted. But it's also foundational to exploring this branch. Good. The main problem is that the term good is interchangeable depending on one's belief. Each ethical theory defines the word differently from others, which makes different groups talk past each other. It makes sense that they use them differently because when it comes down to defining good is positing the ethical theory that one wants to believe in. And this brings us back to a really easy definition of what metaethics is. You can use this one if you want. Metaethics is the study of what is good. Now let's talk about metaethics' main branches: Cognitivism and Non-Cognitivism. Cognitivism is the theory in metaethics that holds moral statements express beliefs that can be true or false. It asserts that when people make moral judgments, they're stating facts about the world, albeit moral facts, which can be objectively assessed for their truth or falsity. Many cognitivists are also moral realists, holding that there are objective moral facts that exist independently of human beliefs or attitudes. According to moral realism, moral properties are part of the fabric of the world, similar to physical properties like mass or charge. Cognitivism allows for the possibility of moral knowledge. If moral statements are truth-apt, meaning they can be true or false, then it is conceivable to know whether a moral statement is true or false. So, simply speaking, cognitivists believe that morality could exist. Okay, let's move on to the other side of things. Non-cognitivism. Non-cognitivists believe that morality just doesn't exist. Or in a more professional term, they believe that moral statements can't be true or false. Instead, morality is just an expression of emotion, attitude, or prescription. They aren't subject to truth or falsity, so it doesn't exist. At least, not in the way cognitivists believe. So right now we have two camps. One side believes that morality does exist, and the other believes that it doesn't. Who's right? I'm going to cut right to the chase. Cognitivists are wrong. Yeah, I know, I'm a heretic, burn me at the stake. But here's the thing, they are wrong. And I'm going to show you why. It all comes down to one little problem. Cognitivists can't back up their claim. The cognitivist position asserts that morality exists. But what comes with an assertion? Well, that's evidence. And yet, they don't have any. Let's talk about moral realism. Moral realism is the belief that objective moral facts exist independently of human beliefs or perceptions. These moral facts are intrinsic, meaning they are true in and of themselves. rather than being defined by their practical or functional use. It's also a branch that most cognitives fall under. Moral realists have three primary arguments. Moral statements can be true. For example, lying for personal gain is wrong. Truth-making. For example, for a sentence to be true, there must be something real that makes it true. And existence of moral facts. For example, therefore, if some moral sentences are true, the things that make them true, moral facts, must exist. There's many different types of realists that have different beliefs, but their arguments, more or less, boil down to these 3 points. But I've got some questions for moral realists. Number 1, how do we know moral truths? Moral realism says that there are objective moral truths, but it doesn't provide a clear way to discovering these truths. Unlike scientific facts, which we can test and observe, there's no reliable method to verify moral facts. In science, we can test hypotheses through experiments and observations. For example, we can verify that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at sea level. But in contrast, moral truths don't have a clear method of verification. We can't conduct an experiment to prove that lying is wrong in the same way. People often rely on their gut feelings or intuitions to make moral judgments. However, these intuitions can vary widely. One person might feel that capital punishment is just, while another might feel it's wrong. These differing intuitions suggest that moral beliefs might be subjective and not reliable indicators of objective truths. When people think about moral issues, their conclusions can be influenced by personal biases, cultural background, and social environments. For example, someone raised in a society that values individual freedom might think differently about the morality of government surveillance compared to someone from a society that prioritizes collective security. Number 2, persistent moral disagreement. If objective moral truths exist, people should agree on these moral issues. However, there's widespread and ongoing disagreement about morality across different cultures and individuals. This might suggest that moral truths are closer to subjective and are influenced by cultural and social factors rather than objective ones. Different cultures have different moral beliefs. For example, in some cultures, arranged marriages are considered morally right, while in others, they are seen as morally wrong. Even in the same culture, people usually disagree on moral issues. For example, people have different opinions on topics like abortion, euthanasia, and animal rights. If there were objective moral truths, we would expect to see more consensus on these issues. There's also widespread moral disagreements that indicate moral beliefs might be subjective. Just like people's tastes in food or music vary, their moral beliefs might also be personal and influenced by upbringing and experiences. Number 3, the is-ought problem. Moral realism struggles with the is-ought problem, which questions how we can derive what we should do from what is. Just because we know facts about the world doesn't mean we can automatically determine moral obligations from them. Knowing factual information about the world doesn't tell us how we ought to behave. For example, we might know that eating meat involves killing animals, which is a fact. But this doesn't tell us whether it's morally right or wrong to eat meat, which is a moral obligation. David Hume argued that you cannot derive an ought, a prescriptive statement, from an is, a descriptive statement. This means that factual knowledge can't lead to moral conclusions. Knowing that people often lie, which is a fact, doesn't tell us whether lying is right or wrong. So, to bridge the gap between facts and morality, we need something else. To conclude that we ought to help the poor, we need the underlying principle that helping those in need is good. Without such principles, facts alone are insufficient. Number 4, the nature of moral facts. Moral realism says moral facts exist, but it doesn't explain what these facts are or how they fit into the natural world. Moral facts aren't like physical objects, which we can see, touch, and measure. For example, we can see a tree or measure the weight of a rock. Moral facts, such as honesty is good, are abstract and can't be observed or measured in the same way. It's not clear how moral facts fit into our understanding of the natural world. While we understand that physical objects exist in space and time, it's harder to imagine where and how moral facts exist. Moral facts are similar to other abstract entities, like numbers or concepts. Just as we might question where the number 2 exists, we can question where moral facts exist. But the abstract nature makes their existence less intuitive and more debatable. Number 5. Purpose and functionality of intrinsic moral values. If all things have a purpose, as is suggested by the principle of sufficient reason, what is the purpose of intrinsic moral values, according to moral realism? If morality serves a functional purpose, like resolving conflicts or benefiting oneself, then it seems to be more instrumentally valuable rather than intrinsically valuable. This challenges the idea that morality can be objective and intrinsic if its main role is practical and functional. Moral realism claims that moral values are intrinsically valuable, meaning that they are good in themselves. However, many moral values seem to have practical purposes. For example, honesty helps build trust, and kindness fosters cooperation. These are practical benefits, not intrinsically valuable ones. The instrumental value of moral values do not prove intrinsic value. For instance, if the main reason for being honest is to maintain trust and social harmony, then honesty's value seems to be tied to its effect rather than being good in itself. The practical functionality of moral values makes it harder to argue that they are objective and independent of their consequences. If the primary role of moral values is to achieve certain outcomes, like resolving conflicts and benefiting society, it suggests that morality is more about practicality than about intrinsic truth. So, as you can see, I have a few reasons why I don't believe moral realists. But the moral realists aren't the only ones who can't answer these questions. It's the same for all cognitivists. They can't answer the question of morality either. They would suggest that morality does exist, or at least can exist, but they don't have any evidence to back it up. This is why I can't be a cognitivist. There's too many unknowns, too many questions. They simply can't back up their claims that morality does exist. So by default, I would have to be in the non-cognitivist camp. So let me tell you why non-cognitivism makes more sense. Number 1, descriptive accuracy of moral language. Non-cognitivism explains how people actually use moral language, which is to express emotions and attitudes rather than to state objective facts. When someone says stealing is wrong, they aren't simply stating a fact like the sky is blue. Instead, they are expressing their disapproval of stealing and trying to influence others to feel the same way. At first, you may reject this immediately. I didn't understand it entirely at first either, but now it makes more sense to me. Good and bad don't actually exist on a universal level. If you've watched the past hour of my explanation, you'll understand why. So, moral statements might not exist. However, value statements absolutely do exist. And if you really think about it, a value statement is just a reflection of your combined preferences, emotions, and biases. It's what you value. This isn't morality, it's value. So when normal people reject something because they don't prefer it, they just call it immoral. But really, it's just their preferences. One example might be a parent telling their child, hitting is bad. The parent isn't making a factual statement. Moral statements haven't been proven to be true. Instead, they're expressing disapproval of hitting and encouraging the child to avoid such bad behavior. Number 2, explanation of moral motivation. Non-cognitivism explains why moral statements naturally motivate action. because they express attitudes or prescriptions. Moral statements inherently motivate because they aren't just stating facts. They are prescribing behaviors or expressing attitudes that encourage action. When someone says, "You should help others," they aren't stating a fact. They're encouraging you to act by helping others, which naturally motivates action. And they're saying this because they value that you should help others. Number 3, handling moral disagreement. Non-cognitivism interprets moral disagreements as clashes of attitudes rather than disputes over objective facts. Moral disagreements are usually deeply personal and emotionally charged because they reflect different attitudes rather than factual disagreements. When we recognize this, it helps us understand why people have strong, differing opinions on moral issues. When two people disagree on whether abortion is wrong, they're expressing different personal attitudes and values, not arguing over factual truth. One woman might believe that it's her body, her choice. She would feel impassioned for this decision because she wants to free herself from any possible restraints on her body. And when another woman says, "Abortion is killing children," this statement usually carries a large amount of emotional enthusiasm. Number 4, avoiding the is-ought problem. Non-cognitivism avoids the is-ought problem by treating moral statements as expressions of attitudes or prescriptions, not as factual claims. Because morality doesn't exist, it doesn't have to contend with deriving moral truth from descriptive truth. One example is when someone says, "Stealing is wrong." They're not trying to derive a moral obligation from a factual statement. Instead, it's expressing disapproval of stealing, thereby naturally conveying a prescription to avoid stealing. Number 5, psychological plausibility and mutualism. Non-cognitivism aligns with psychological explanations of morality. It views moral attitudes as traits that promote social harmony and mutualism. Moral attitudes, such as disapproval of theft, can be seen as psychological traits that help strengthen social bonds and deter harmful behaviors. People don't want a society that accepts stealing because they value their property. If a community collectively disapproves of theft, this shared attitude helps build trust among its members, and it discourages theft. It makes society safer and more efficient. So the main takeaway from non-cognitivism is that it's a descriptive ethical theory. Rather than assigning oughts, it describes ises, and it accurately describes those ises. It's a much more agnostic take on morality. So yeah, that's why I'm a non-cognitivist. It just makes more sense. I'm pretty sure that's everything. So you can try to bring up relativism. But the problem is that relativism and subjectivism don't believe in intrinsic universal morality. In fact, they're way closer to the non-cognitivist camp than the cognitivist one. The only difference really is a semantic one. Relativists believe that any person can be right in their own morals. But at that point, we're not really talking about intrinsic absolute morality. So, what are your thoughts? Did I miss anything? I'm pretty sure I covered all the main arguments. I tried to structure it as best as I could, but you'll have to let me know if everything made sense. Listen, if you don't understand everything I said, I don't blame you. This past week has made my brain deflate into rubber. I tried my best to explain, but I guess we'll just have to see if it makes it through. Anyway, let me know if you disagree. Please, tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think I am because I'm a non-cognitivist, lol. But yeah, my hands hurt from typing and making notes and researching. So, boom, I'm done. But thank you for watching and let me know what your thoughts are.